What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today I wanted to make a follow-up to last week's video about 5 things I do want in Jedi Fallen Order, by this time covering the 5 main things that I don't want in Jedi Fallen Order instead. If you haven't seen that last video, then I will leave a link up in the top right corner, so make sure to check that one out after the video. Now, just like in the last video, everything on this list is definitely a possibility. Nothing is completely far-fetched, so let's hope that Respawn has done a great job with this game and left out a few of the things that I am about to mention. So, getting straight into it, the first thing on my list, and this is a really important one in terms of the gameplay, is that I really hope Cal doesn't end up being too overpowered, especially at the start of the game when he's meant to be only a Padawan and still has obviously lots of learning to go. My mind instantly goes to a game like The Force Unleashed, which, don't get me wrong, was an amazing game and probably one of my favourite Star Wars games ever, but we all know that in that game Starkiller was super overpowered, and despite it working well in that game, I really don't think it would work the same way in Jedi Fallen Order. This game seems as though it would be best for Cal to start out much weaker and sort of having him struggle to survive early on, and then as the story progresses he'd obviously get much more powerful as we play and level up his skill tree. From what we know about the story, Cal is obviously a former Padawan who then had to essentially shut himself off from the Force after the Jedi Purge in order to not be found out by the Empire. Now, because he shut himself off from the Force, I think it'd be a much more enjoyable start to the game if he kind of really struggles to even use the Force in the opening few missions, and then as you progress he kind of just starts to remember and become more powerful from there on out. Now, even if that is the case, I do kind of hope he doesn't get too powerful towards the end either, with the only exception being if they can place it into the story without it being too much of an issue. Before now, we've never heard of Cal in Star Wars canon before, and you'd think that if he does end up being some crazy powerful Jedi, then there would have at least been some mention of him throughout the universe before, which is why I hope he isn't too powerful, because at the end of the day it just kind of doesn't fit that well into Star Wars canon, unless, like I said, they can fit it into the story well enough. Now, moving on to the next thing on the list, and that is that I really hope the gameplay isn't too repetitive like some single player games tend to be, because from what we've seen so far it does seem to have a little bit of a touch of repetitive gameplay, but in saying that we have only seen maybe 45 minutes of gameplay altogether. I don't know about you guys, but for me there's nothing worse than in a single player game just doing the same thing over and over again throughout each mission, fighting the same types of enemies, doing the same types of puzzles, and just having the same types of objectives to complete in order to move on. The best kind of gameplay for me is when you're doing something almost completely different each and every mission, and obviously there are going to be similar elements involved. For example, in this game there will be the wall running and the climbing, and there's also going to be some regular enemies to fight and stuff like that, and all of that is fine in my opinion, just as long as the rest of the gameplay does vary throughout. Repetitive gameplay just leads to most people getting bored of the game pretty easily, and when it comes to single player games, the main goal should honestly be for the game to be as engaging as possible throughout the entire story, so that at the end you almost feel sad that you finished the game because you just wanted to keep on going. All the great games that I've ever played have left me with that feeling. However, there have been plenty of games too that just kind of leave me feeling a little bored or finding the missions a little tedious halfway through the game, and then it's almost like you're grinding to get to the end of the game and finish it, which is obviously never a good thing, at least depending on what the game is anyway. If there are a solid mix of enemies to fight in each mission, plenty of different puzzles throughout the game to keep you guessing, and overall just non-repetitive missions, then that will definitely help the game out in the long run. Moving on, the next thing that I really hope isn't in the game is linear map design. Judging by what we've seen so far, this one definitely makes me a little nervous because it does seem to be somewhat linear so far, at least in terms of the map design, but I'm hoping that's just the areas we've seen and not the whole game overall. Now, honestly, linear map design isn't the end of the world. God of War had pretty linear map design, and to be honest, it was just linear overall, but that game was probably one of the better games I've ever played, so I don't think this is necessarily do or die, but in saying that, I do really tend to enjoy games much more when the maps aren't all that linear, and you can essentially just go on whichever path you want in order to reach the objective. Again, judging by what we've seen so far, it does look very linear in terms of the map design, so I am slightly worried about this one, but as long as it's handled well and is enjoyable enough that no one really notices, then I don't think it'll end up being too big of a deal. It does seem as though there's going to be sort of one way to get to the objective, and then there'll be some other random pathways that will just sort of lead to Easter eggs and stuff like that, and in my opinion that can sometimes make things a little too obvious when there are only sort of 2 pathways and one is slightly off to the side. It almost tells you directly that one path is to the objective and the other path is to something random like a collectible or whatever the case may be. Again, I don't think it's the end of the world if this does become a reality, because there are plenty of games out there that are linear and are still great games, so I'm not completely against it, I just hope it's done in a way that no one has any issues with it. Moving on, the next thing on the list is that I really hope there are more than 4 planets. So far, I think we've only seen 4 planets on this little hollow projector on the Stinger Mantis, and honestly, I'm not 100% sure if they've always been the same 4 planets on there, but I do know that we've never seen it with more than 4, which does make me a little nervous. So far, Kashyyyk, Zepho, and Dathomir are the only confirmed planets. The 4th one, I'm not 100% sure if that's actually been mentioned yet, but one thing that I do hope is there are at least, say, 6 or 7 planets rather than just the 4 that we know of. Kashyyyk and Zepho are both green looking planets. Obviously we all know that Kashyyyk is pretty much just a forest slash jungle type of planet, whereas for Zepho it's actually never been seen before because it is a creation of Respawn's, but from what we have seen in the gameplay, it does look to be pretty green with all the grass as well, and so I'm hoping that there are a few other planets just to avoid looking at the same thing throughout each mission. I think 6 or 7 planets overall would be really great for variation within the game. You could have the greener planets like I just mentioned, and then there's obviously Dathomir, which is kind of like a red desert type of planet. And then there'd be the option to still have, say, a more water-based planet and then another regular looking desert planet or something like that, which would all help when it comes to the point I made earlier about avoiding repetition. At the end of the day, 4 planets is probably enough so long as they do all vary a lot and we get to sort of travel and see a lot of different places within the planets, but I would definitely love to see more than the 4 we know of if I did have the choice. Now, lastly, and this is a very basic and obvious one, which is that I really hope the story isn't short and lackluster, since that is the main reason that a lot of us are going to be playing the game. For me personally, the story of this one is probably about 80% of what I'm most excited for. I'm really hoping that we're all left satisfied with the story at the end of the game, and even though I still want everything else to be great as well, if the gameplay isn't great and the graphics aren't great, so long as the story is great, I think I will be pretty pleased with the game. The writer for this game is actually the same guy who wrote one of the God of War games. I think it was God of War 2, and so I do have faith that the story is going to be pretty decent, but I have also said that about a lot of things before, so I guess we're going to have to just wait and see. If the story is long enough and if it makes us love and hate certain characters, then I think that should do well, but if the story isn't great, I think this game is in for a big hit just solely based on that. But like I said, I do have faith that it will be pretty decent. So that is going to be it for this one, guys. If you did enjoy the video, then make sure to smash that like button to help support the channel. Like I said, I have made a previous video to this one about 5 things that I do want, so if you haven't seen that one, then make sure to go and check that one out as well. And if you are new to the channel, then feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any more Fallen Order videos or live streams. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.